Have you heard of little children who spontaneously remember past lives? At around 2 to 5 years old, they start speaking as if being somebody else and living somewhere else with another family. Unlike the proofs for reincarnation resulting from hypnosis that we assessed in the previous episode, these children provide concrete information about alleged past lives that can be verified. So are their testimonies reliable, and do they prove reincarnation? I'm Dr. Ernest Valea, and in this episode we analyze this kind of evidence for reincarnation, after we start with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. A more convincing kind of testimonies that seem to prove reincarnation are cases in which past lives are spontaneously remembered by little children, 2 to 5 years old. There have been hundreds of cases documented so far, in which children start speaking about places, people, and events of a past life, providing details that they could not have known by natural means. When conducting investigations on the spot, many details prove to be correct, surprising both the natural family of the child and the supposed family to which the child claims to have belonged. Some have birthmarks that resemble the scars of the dead person, and most remember they had a violent death. After the age of 6, the memories begin to fade, and after the age of 10, most do not remember anything of their past lives. Although cases of spontaneous recall of past lives are fewer than those of hypnotic regression, they seem more convincing. They have become famous as a result of the research conducted by Stevenson, a professor of psychiatry at Virginia State University. His investigations carried him across the world over several decades, and the book that made him famous, 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation, is a reference book in the study of this phenomenon. Most cases he studied occurred in India and Sri Lanka, while fewer are reported in other parts of the world, mainly among groups in which reincarnation is accepted as part of the culture. The cases reported in the East are always richer in details and more convincing than Western cases. A spectacular case is Shanti Devi, a girl born in 1926 in Delhi. When she was 3 years old, she started speaking about a previous life she had in Mathura, a village about 130 kilometers away. She claimed she was born in 1902 and that her real name is Lugdi and that she belongs to a higher caste. In her past life, she had married a merchant named Kedar Nacho Bey and died 10 days after the birth of their son. Since she insisted on these claims, the parents wrote a letter to the alleged husband in Mathura, and surprisingly, this former husband, called Kedar, responded, confirming all those facts. Later, he visited the girl's family in disguise, but was immediately identified as her former husband. The following year, the family made a trip to Mathura, accompanied by a committee meant to verify the information provided by Shanti Devi. Although the little girl had never left Delhi, she recognized places and people in Mathura. In the train station, she recognized a relative of Kedar in the crowd and indicated the correct way to her former home. There she recognized her former father-in-law and seemed to be familiar with the house. As a last detail, she said she had buried some money in a corner of the house, and Kedar admitted he found the money after the death of his wife. Although cases reported in the West are fewer and poorer in details, there still exist some interesting ones. One famous case is that of the Pollock family in England. They lost their two daughters in a tragic car accident in 1957. John Pollock, the father, was a firm believer in reincarnation, although he was a Catholic, and expected that God would prove him right. After the two daughters died, his wife became pregnant, and John told her he was sure they would have twin girls, who would be the reincarnation of the two daughters they lost in the accident. To everyone's surprise, she gave birth to twin girls. Now, the mother did not believe in reincarnation, but around the age of 3, the twins began to behave as if they had the memories of their deceased sisters. They recognized places in the town where their sister grew up, remembered episodes of their life there, recognized their toys, and even had panic attacks as if they were reliving the car accident. After the age of 5, the memories began to fade away, and the girls lost their strange behavior. Other cases presented by Stevenson reveal a compromising element. For instance, in 1954, an Indian boy called Jasbir, aged 3.5, became ill with smallpox and fell into a coma. His parents thought he died, but several hours later he woke up, and after a few weeks he was completely healed. Strangely, after this illness, he acquired a completely different behavior. He claimed to be Sobaram, a member of the Brahmin caste, who died in an accident at the age of 22, while Jasbir was ill. He had a different voice, that of the allegedly reincarnated Brahmin. He used new words and refused to sit at meals with his family because they belonged to a lower caste. In a visit to the alleged home from his past life, he recognized his relatives and wished to stay with them. He seemed to be attached especially to his son from the past life. When asked what happened after his death as Sobaram, he said that in the state between death and reincarnation, he met a Hindu ascetic who advised him to take shelter in Jasbir's body. What is disturbing in this case is that reincarnation took place when Jasbir was already 3.5 years old. So how can we explain such cases? Stevenson affirms they can hardly be taken as fraud in order to gain material benefits. Nor can cryptomnesia be an explanation because they didn't know anything about the previous family. And why do children lose their memories after the age of 6? Stevenson argues it must be because they start school, lose family ties, and enter new relationships. The new information they accumulate erases these memories, and only in rare cases do vague memories remain until the age of 20. Although the testimonies produced by children about past lives are spectacular, their credibility is affected by a number of methodological flaws in the way they have been recorded. Of the 20 cases in Stevenson's book, only 7 were recorded before the child went to see his or her former house. And even these 7 cases were recorded by family members. So the veracity of the memories could be compromised by being enriched following the dialogue between the two families. Most of the investigations conducted by Stevenson were made many years after the occurrence, when the child no longer remembered anything. So the stories were reconstructed from the testimonies of family members. For example, in the case of the Pollock family, the case was investigated as late as 1979. That is 15 years after the actual events. And the original testimonies were recorded only by the parents, with the father being very eager to find in the twin babies a confirmation of the reincarnation of his 2 deceased girls. The Shanti Devi case was recorded 30 years later than it happened. Another problem concerns the translators used by Stevenson. Most of the people he investigated did not speak English, and his translators were ardent believers in reincarnation. For instance, Jamuna Prasad was a Hindu with a declared wish to popularize reincarnation among Westerners, while another one, called Banerjee, was active as a hypnotist who helped his clients remember past lives under hypnosis. In order to understand the reliability of these stories as proofs for reincarnation, we can apply here our discussion on the criteria for the preservation of personal identity in episode 3. Memory by itself is not a sufficient criterion to prove the preservation of personal identity. The preservation of memory presupposes personal continuity, and thus does not prove it. In the case of past life recall by children, we would need an external reference independent of them to establish that the child with the past life memories continues the life of the deceased. Their identity cannot be established merely by conformity of information presented by the child and by the family of the deceased person. In other words, the information presented about the person of the past life is not enough to establish its identity with the present child. No matter how much information I might be able to present about a person who lived in the past, and how much I might insist that I am that person, it would not prove my identity with her. In past life recall, the external authority which makes people accept there are cases of reincarnation is belief in reincarnation itself. So we are facing a circular argument here. These cases demonstrate reincarnation only for those who already believe it. Stevenson himself does not consider his studies to be infallible proofs for reincarnation. As the title of his book indicates, these cases only suggest reincarnation. In his own words, The claim of a memory of a previous life by itself tells us nothing about veridicality. And if the claim of a memory accompanies evidence of authenticity and veridicality, this experience alone cannot distinguish extrasensory perception from a true memory of a previous life. So what other resources do we have to explain what happens in these cases? From a physicalist point of view, they must be considered fraud. But this option cannot explain the veracity of the information produced by these children. Something is missing in any physicalist interpretation of these cases. So we must explore resources that go beyond the boundaries of physicalism. Stevenson concluded that there could be only two possible ways to explain these cases. One is reincarnation, and the other is the possession of these children by spirits, as in cases of mediumism. As a parapsychologist, Stevenson explains that possession is, I quote, "Possession is either a partial influence with the primary personality continuing to retain some control of the physical body, or a temporary, if apparently complete, control of the physical organism with later return to the original personality." At the age when children tell their stories of past lives, their discernment is almost non-existing, especially in the spiritual realm, which makes them vulnerable to deception. As personal identity develops, the spirits lose their grip over the child, which could explain the loss of memories by the age of 10. The argument against this hypothesis is the assumption that these spirits have no reason to deceive us by introducing themselves as human personalities coming from a past life, instead of non-physical and non-human spirits. But for Christians, this is not a credible explanation, and we should be aware that certain spirits have every reason to deceive us. I'll do a separate video on spiritualism and spirit possession. Stevenson affirms that we can observe a gradual transition from cases that can be explained as possession to those that can be explained rather as reincarnation. Cases like Jasbir and Sobaram seem to be clear cases of possession. There are other such cases in which Stevenson considers that possession took place after birth and lasted between 1 day and several weeks. In other cases, the possession occurred sometime between conception and birth. Finally, he argues that most convincing cases for reincarnation are those in which there is no temporal overlap between the two lives, and the details evoked from the past life are quite rich. In Stevenson's words, I quote, "If the previous personality seems to associate itself with a physical organism at the time of conception or during embryonic development, we speak of reincarnation. If the association between previous personality and physical organism only comes later, we speak of possession. However, it is not clear why we cannot speak of possession instead of reincarnation in cases when the two lives do not intersect. Just because there is a time gap in between should make us believe in reincarnation. This should be a matter of concern, especially for Christians. In some cases, a spiritualistic kind of announcement is made to the parents before the birth of their child. Stevenson says, "In many cases, someone connected with a future subject has a dream in which a deceased person appears to the dreamer and indicates his wish or intention to reincarnate. The dreamer is usually a married woman and a potential mother for the next incarnation of the person who is to be reborn. Sometimes the woman's husband, another relative, or a friend may have a dream of this type. I call these dreams announcing dreams because they occur, with a few rare exceptions, before the birth and sometimes before the conception of the subject." Possession is called in Hinduism parkaya pravesh, which means entering another person's body in order to control it. Sri Chinmoy, the famous Indian guru, who by the way does not accept that past life recall by children would be a proof of reincarnation, uses the possession of his disciples' bodies as a teaching method to prove to them that they have lived previous lives. I quote from his book, "If someone asked me to convince him that he had previous lives, even if that individual did not believe in reincarnation, I would be able to prove it to him. I would ask that individual to meditate with me for a few minutes, and I would enter into him and bring to the fore his immediate past incarnation." In the Yoga Sutra, part 3, verse 37, possession is mentioned as the entry of one's mind into the body of another person. It is one of the supernatural powers or siddhis acquired by yogis in meditation. Finally, the only reason left for Stevenson to interpret children's stories as proof of reincarnation instead of possession is the presence of birthmarks identical to the scars of the deceased. In his view, these birthmarks cannot be explained by a possession scenario because they appear on the body before birth. Stevenson mentions a case among the Tlingit Indians of Alaska who believe in reincarnation, in which an old man explicitly told his niece that he would reincarnate as her child. Before he died, he showed her his scars, by which she could recognize him as her baby. The child, called Corliss Chotkin Jr., had exactly those marks on his body, and then recalled episodes from the old man's life, presenting himself as his reincarnated uncle. However, Linde Silva, a Sri Lankan analyst of these cases, argues that not even birthmarks can be taken as certain proofs of reincarnation. Silva argues that they can occur through psychological induction, for example, as a result of the mother's fear for her child. He describes a case in which a pregnant woman feared that her child would get smallpox. At birth, he had red spots on his forehead, similar to the red spots provoked by smallpox, but without having the actual disease. In another case, the mother was afraid that the bullet wounds that caused her husband's death would manifest on the body of her child. Despite assurances from doctors that such fears are absurd, the marks appeared, according to her fears, in the exact spots the bullets pierced her husband's body. However, these were not interpreted as proof of the father's reincarnation. A master of Hindu meditation and one who believed in reincarnation, called Sri Somasundara Deshika Paramacharya, wrote an open letter to Stevenson concerning his investigations and stated that all the 300 cases he had studied were possession cases. Given that most reincarnated people had a violent death, this Hindu master argued that the subtle body of these people is, I quote, capable of possessing suitable living persons not known to them previously, and narrate through them their life history, and even point out in cases of homicide where their physical bodies were hidden or buried. Another aspect that should raise a red flag is that the stories told by those who remember past lives, both through hypnosis and spontaneously as children, are not centered on karmic justification. They do not point out what needs to be corrected in the present life in order to avoid further reincarnations. They only create a sensationalist aura to amaze us and convince us that we had past lives. Westerners embrace them because they ignore basic Eastern beliefs, such as the nature of the self and that reincarnation is a burden which we must escape at any price, even by giving up personal existence itself. As mentioned in episode 12, the New Age movement presents reincarnation as an eternal progression of the soul towards higher spiritual forms of life. But this is not what these children are talking about, as most speak of better lives they had in the past. So it does not work either way. These stories do not confirm one's preservation of personal identity through reincarnation, nor do they speak of an evolution to higher states of being. Therefore, do not let yourselves be deceived. There are no modern proofs for reincarnation, so you have not lived previous lives and you have no other lives in this world. This life is enough for us to be saved. In the next episode, we assess the claim that reincarnation was once part of Christianity, but was removed by the clergy. Meanwhile, please subscribe and share this information. Thank you for watching and God bless you.